everything is about sex. Except 90s game Xenon. Then it's about how reality is a construct and you can never know whether or not you're truly awake. Oscar Wilde. You know, most visual novels like to go around pretending that their H scenes are some deep literary device, that their context in the story somehow elevates them to being more than a sudden having interlude to an otherwise pedestrian narrative. But, as Shakespeare once said, is important and all, dude, but there is never a narrative justification for a cut to the face. That was the case when I reviewed also known as the direct inspiration for the greatest visual novel / anime of all time, Steins Gate, a few years ago. But it was still overall good enough that I decided to check out the author's earlier works and found that the bard was completely wrong. See, the consequence of as a marketing tactic rather than an honest narrative choice is that it just feels disorientingly surreal out of place. But what if that was the entire point? What if the entire story was about blurring the line between reality and dreams? What if the point was to make you question every single scene in the story, throwing you so out of touch with everything happening around you that you even begin to question your own reality? Would not these sudden graphic interludes to a hazy wet fever dream of mega waifus be right at home in this narrative? Would there not then, William, be narrative justification for a hot load of Xenon is very much an adult visual novel, and it is also one of the richest, most philosophically deep stories I've ever had the pleasure of reading in my entire life. In a moment, you will wake up, and you will know that everything you see and hear is real, a mirror unto the truth of your own heart. Now, on the count of 3, you will open your eyes. 1, 2, 3. You, Koji, wake up in the doctor's office. You hear the gentle chirping of birds as the afternoon sun leaks through the blinds. Sitting in front of you is the doctor, asking you to recount the dream you just had. The haunting, feverish dream you've been having night after night. And as you start describing what you saw, at some point, you can't tell when, you stop. You stop narrating and start experiencing as you gradually sink back into that same dream, finding yourself in a dark hospital room, your chest covered in clear silicone pads like some sort of guinea pig. You call for a nurse, but hearing no answer, decide to wander out into the hallway. Unlike the eerily chilly room, the air in the hallway is hot and thick. You feel uneasy, but relax just a little as your eyes fall upon the single plant decorating the corridor, feeling out of place, yet so real you can almost reach out and touch it. You hear a strange, high-pitched ringing in your ears, but before you have time to think, you suddenly hear the tap, tap, tap of footsteps coming down the hall. Still trying to get a grasp of your surroundings, you open the nearest door and hide. You hear the footsteps stop, followed by the sudden gasp of a woman's voice coming from the room you woke up in. Listening intently, you accidentally open the door to reveal a young, timid-looking girl wearing a low-cut, wine-red dress, a lemon-yellow ribbon, and big, round, childlike eyes. "Ranfa," she says. "My name." You ask your own, but she responds only with silence, running away and leaving you, once again, standing alone in the dark, silent corridor. You then find yourself in a large room, so cold that pillows of fog exit your mouth with every breath, and see a row of strange capsules lining the room. Stumbling towards one, your head spinning in a dizzy haze, you see and hear the soft flickering of a small electronic console, the screen dimly lit with the words Psychic Program Encoder. The capsule opens to reveal a beautiful girl laying there, naked and unconscious. Suddenly, a pulsing alarm goes off, and your head starts spinning and spinning as you stumble back through the pulsing corridor back to your room, and the world gets darker and darker and darker, until you hear a voice calling your name, and you wake up once more in the doctor's office. You hear the gentle chirping of birds as the afternoon sun leaks through the blinds. Sitting in front of you is the doctor asking you to recount the dream you just had. The haunting, feverish dream you've been having night after night. And as soon as the thought that you've just had this conversation enters your mind, she asks you to describe, in detail, what you just saw. What kind of room you were just in, what you did after waking up, what was so important about the door, whether it was hot or cold, whether the sound piercing your ears was a low rumble or a high-pitched whine, if the girl's bow was silver or yellow, what kind of dress she was wearing, what your impression of her was, what her eyes looked like. So, this very simple memory test is the first bit of absolutely genius writing in Xenon, because if you mess up, she makes you start from the beginning, citing some contradiction in your story, some confounding factor. And here's what's so brilliant about this. As someone who is functionally literate, but still very much not Japanese, to me this feels helpful, reinforcing what I read, making sure I didn't miss anything. But see, that's just it. What this does is make you focus on every single little detail of what happened, reinforcing the idea that everything you saw is what happened, isn't it? I mean, it's comforting, right? Having a line drawn of what to believe in, of what's real. And what elevates this even further is just how Koji questions everything he sees. Recalling what he saw, he tells the doctor, Ryoko-sensei, that it felt kind of strange, like it wasn't quite real, that something was off about it. And she responds, "Isn't that normal for a dream?" And while that makes sense, there's something wrong about it that you just can't quite put your finger on. But even if something is a dream, Ryoko-sensei says every dream has some deeper psychological meaning behind it. So, finishing your therapy, eyes still reeling from the visions in your mind, wandering around the hospital, you once again run into this strange, chaste-looking girl who you keep seeing around the building, and she tells you the same thing, that there is a deeper meaning to your dreams. And what we'll see is every character, on some level, make Koji question both his own sense of reality as well as the significance of every moment in between. Where does this barrier between reality and dreams lie? Which one is real? And, more importantly, which one is more important? Because if dreams are just as important as the waking world, what does that say about Koji's reality? Eventually, you run into Koji's girlfriend Megumi and learn a bit more of his life before he came to the hospital. She tells us that her father is the main patron of the hospital and that Koji is here not because he needs therapy, but because Megumi introduced him to a well-paying job, a test subject where he undergoes psychotherapy. Now, you'll notice that this was made in Japan in the 90s, and therapy still isn't normalized here, or anywhere really, but even more so. So this is a very progressive meta-narrative that it uses to throw you off your feet, make you feel at ease, and then use against you. So, before Megumi can tell you much more, Ryoko-sensei's assistant, Sayaka, comes for Koji's checkup and kicks her out of the room. Sayaka comes on to him a little, coquettish little thing as she is, but just as she does, Koji, exhausted from all his counseling, passes out and once again wakes up in his dreams, feeling both hot and cold, his head filled with a loud, droning buzz. He opens his eyes and finds himself in a room with very large machinery, unable to remember why he was standing here in the first place. Wondering what happened to the hospital and why he feels so cold when the air is so hot and so thick that a river of sweat is running across his face. Falneria, the woman in the capsule, has been looking for him, and Ranfa. He asks her where we are, and we learn that Koji was the sole survivor of the second investigation squad investigating a distress signal from the planet below. He wakes up once more to the gentle, dimpled face of a third woman, Tracy. He tries to ask Tracy about himself, about exactly who he is, but before she has a chance to tell him anything, in comes a call from Falneria on the bridge, alerting her to an approaching magnetic storm, and Tracy leaves Koji to his own devices. So, instead, still wondering why he's here, he leaves the room where he finds Ranfa, who's surprised that he remembers her. Of course he would. They literally just spoke. Or did they? He's not really sure. When would he have talked to her? He just talked to Tracy right before he talked to Falneria in the engine room. Perhaps right before that. He says it felt like several hours ago, but perhaps it was only a few mere minutes. So, Ranfa asks if maybe the conversation they had was a dream. Why? Because we met before, he presses again. That's what you remember, right, Koji? She says. It's lines like these, gentle prodding from every single character. Nothing inherently malicious, nothing even strange or abnormal, just off, somehow, in a way that's hard to put into words. That's what really sells the story. But that was a dream. You do dream, don't you, Koji? She asks. Wondering when the last time he'd slept was, she asks him one more thing. Koji, she says, please remember. And his consciousness fades once again. Summarizing the story like this, it's slightly more clear, but something about Xenon makes the beginning and end of every single scene just kind of blend together. How did he wake up in the infirmary after talking to Falneria? What was he doing then? When did one moment become the next? Some moments just kind of give way to the next. From the start, when Ryoko-sensei puts you into hypnosis and you gradually transition from recounting to living the events of Koji's mind. Every single moment in the story starts to blend together, leaving you to question how events fit together when they happened, and that leaves you, the player, with a foggy memory of if they even happened at all. And what's most unsettling is how easy it is to just exist in this moment, how all these beautiful women put you at ease. Naturally, when things feel off, you want to question the world around you, but when everyone you speak to is so gentle, so caring and easy, it becomes hard to do so. Not because you don't want to, but because you're never given an explicit reason to. Why would you, when there's obviously nothing wrong? Until there is. But because of all this, the moment there is something wrong, it becomes hard to tell if it feels wrong because it's not real, or because it, in fact, is. That is, if anything is real in the first place. You hear the gentle chirping of birds as the afternoon sun leaks through the blinds. Sitting in front of you is the doctor, asking you to recount the dream you just had. The haunting, feverish dream you've been having night after night. Wait, what's going on? He just woke up, right? In reality. And this is what just happened, right? A dream. And this, you can feel at ease because this reality with Ryoko-sensei in front of the late afternoon sun and the gentle singing of birds, this is real. You can know that, right? But then, why would your dream tell you you're dreaming? Why would your dream tell you to remember? That's unusual, but then again, is it normal to have dreams that are usual? or normal to have dreams that are unusual? How can you tell the difference? Hopefully you're starting to see what's so captivating about Kanno Hiroyuki's writing in this novel as you question this and the unease of you realizing that you keep waking up in these sessions with Ryoko-sensei. So, questioning where dreams and reality begin and end, again, if that question even really matters, he asks Ryoko-sensei if she just said the same thing as before, and she asks him if he has a sense of déjà vu. You know, the cult people would call this a supernatural phenomena. Not that she would believe in this, obviously, she's a scientist. Your attention turns to the afternoon sun and the gentle singing of birds, a sign that everything is how it should be, because there's nothing weird or strange about this at all. Before therapy ends, she stops and asks Koji if anything has changed for him recently, like his mental state, and they begin to talk in yet another conversation that seems strangely familiar. She leaves, and he soon finds himself standing in the corridor, his face covered in sweat, wondering why it's so hot in the middle of winter, and goes to find somewhere that's air-conditioned, remembering that today his girlfriend is supposed to visit. He finds her in the lobby, lamenting being chased out of the room by Sayaka a week ago, and she tells him she regrets introducing him to this job. As a reader, you'll notice that Megami has been referring to this as a job when every other character has presented this to you as therapy. Being left to wonder about this, Megami tells him that her father plans to close this place soon for political reasons, but the important thing is, he needs to leave here, and quickly. Because, being suspicious of Ryoko-sensei, she looked into her background and found that she used to work at some research institute before it was shut down, and Megami goes off to renegotiate Koji's contract with her. Meanwhile, Koji heads upstairs and runs into Sayaka, who tells him that the encounter was yesterday. Now, here's where you, as the reader, start to really question what you're seeing. The spaceship, obviously, to us living in the real world, feels more like a dream. But if Koji's perception of what's really happening on Earth in what we naturally perceive as the real world is completely unreliable, yet his perception of what we might assume is the dream world becomes more and more lucid, which one is really the dream? When did Megami come visit in the hospital? Presumably, one or more of these characters is our anchor to reality, but if what neither of them says matches what we're experiencing, then how do we know what's really going on? So Koji asks Sayaka to take him to the psychoanalysis room, passing by Mai in the hall, who tells him she'll be waiting for him on the roof. And upon entering with her, Koji realizes that this place, surrounded by all this machinery, this is where these dreams all started. But before you can consider this train of thought any further, you're interrupted by Ryoko-sensei, who asks if anything has changed about his mental state, and he says he feels his grip on reality has weakened since they started this research, and asks if there's any possible side effects. She tells him there's not a chance, and that Mai was looking for him. Heading up to the roof and seeing this sweet girl standing there, he wonders to himself what about her made him so uneasy in the first place. And she tells him he promised to tell her about his dreams. And he does. And she listens intently, and then asks why he thought in his dream that he felt that he had had a strange dream. And this is where she tells him about Zhongzhou, the Chinese philosopher who once dreamed that he was a careless and happy butterfly. And upon waking up and realizing that he was not, in fact, a beautiful butterfly, but instead the philosopher Zhongzhou. And then he stopped and thought, how do I know that I am the man dreaming that he is a butterfly, and not the butterfly dreaming that he is a man? Is there a way to know? And even if you could, would it even matter? As Koji stands there and ponders whether or not he is the butterfly, he wakes up once again in his dreams, in that bed on the ship, to a very loud alarm, and he realizes that he was having a very strange dream indeed. So he leaves the room to investigate the alarm, running into Falneria, who tells him that they have rescued another member of the research squad who is lying in a deep coma. Koji questions who they all are and what's going on, and as it may help restore his memories, finally, Falneria explains the events of the story to us. She says the remains of an ancient civilization was discovered on this planet, and a research team was sent out to investigate. But they lost contact with headquarters when every single member of the crew fell into a mysterious coma. And so, a second research team was sent to investigate. When they too lost contact, a third parapsychology ship was sent out. You, Koji, were thought to be the sole survivor of the second ship until this mysterious woman in a coma, Bianca, was discovered just now. So, as a few pieces of the mystery come together, you wonder, if he has no memories of this world, and she's in a coma, how much of this, if any at all, is related to his life on Earth? See, a lot of stories like to use the protagonist having amnesia or something as a narrative device for the plot and the characters to be explained to you, but this often feels contrived and unnatural, like it's a mechanical necessity rather than a legitimate part of the story itself. Because, it usually is. But in Xenon, this works so well because Koji is not even an unreliable narrator, because you haven't even the faintest hint of an idea whether he is or not. Everyone and everything you're presented with is completely 100% unreliable. There's truth to be found in it, but you have no idea how or where to even begin. Everything feels like a hazy fever dream because that's exactly what it is. So, now, when Koji starts hearing voices in his head to tell him to wake up, that he feels that someone is there, you have no real frame of reference as to whether or not this is someone from the real world calling him to wake up, whether he's dreaming this voice, or whether everything that is happening is some sort of dream. So, now, after this huge revelation, Falneria reveals to him that they may have found a third survivor on the ship and asks him if he'd like to go investigate with her. The two of them set off, and they find the other ship is identical to theirs in almost every single way. They split up and search for survivors, first checking the docking bay, then the bridge, before finding Ranfa all the way in the engine room. Continuing his search in the captain's room, he finds a logbook detailing how, since they discovered the sole survivor of the first ship, his crew began to fall, one by one, into a deep sleep. Just what is he? The captain wonders. Hopeless and distraught, their mission is a failure, but he, the captain, along with his daughter Bianca, will remain with the ship. Koji finds a video microdisc left with the log, and all of a sudden, the ship's gravity malfunctions, and you get a call from Falneria, saying the ship's being pulled towards Nazi, the planet. But just as you head for the docking bay and the shuttle, Ranfa appears once again to tell you to remember your dreams, what you saw, and what you heard. Suddenly, Koji feels a blunt force to the back of his head and passes out before a voice once again tells him to wake up. And then, yet another voice tells him that, on the count of 3, he will open his eyes. 1, 2, 3. You hear the gentle chirping of birds as the afternoon sun leaks through the blinds. Sitting in front of you is the doctor, asking you to recount the dream you just had. The haunting, feverish dream you've been having night after night. Koji stops, hearing the emergency alarm. He asks Ryoko-sensei if she can hear it, then suddenly wakes up again where he was with Mai on the roof in what, after everything that happens, now feels like eons ago. And Mai asks him about the disc. He stops and wonders if this is real, and if so, how long has he been standing here in this moment? Mai says that he's tired and should go back to his room when Ryoko-sensei appears once again and calls him for counseling, even though it's still the middle of the night. Mai answers meekly and follows behind, with Koji remarking to himself how this feels like an illusion, wondering again if all this, is just a dream, before snapping himself out of it, standing there and wondering how he could think of such things in the middle of the cold, cold night. And goes back inside, thinking that questioning his own reality is just another way of running from it. Arriving in his room, Megumi calls him on the phone and tells him he needs to leave there, or else he will go insane. You might consider how she would know he just arrived in this room, unless she's somewhere nearby, which, then, before you can give this train of thought much attention, Megumi cries out as if being grabbed by someone, and Koji goes off in search of her instead of listening to what she's telling him, because obviously trying to talk this over with the woman who was just attacked is the right move, and there's nothing wrong with this, shut up, and he heads off in search of that static noise he heard from her end of the line, probably coming from the computer room, as he wonders about his inability to remember things that happened just a few minutes ago. Pondering all of this, and the woman in his dreams telling him to wake up, and how it all fits together, and where exactly he is right now, he finds Sayaka there and tells her what happened to Megumi before being summoned by Ryoko-sensei once again for counseling. Again, he questions why they would be doing this in the middle of the night, except it's literally the middle of the day and you can see people walking around the hospital. What are you talking about, Koji? And once again, he has the usual conversation with Ryoko-sensei. So I think we really need to dig into what revisiting this scene repeatedly means and why this is such a fucking clever bit of writing. One, obviously, it creates a sense of familiarity. You're constantly being plunged into not just the unknown, but the state of questioning your own reality and everything happening around you. Here, in the calm, non-judgmental therapy office, with the gentle smile of a doctor, an almost motherly woman looking after you, accompanied by the gentle afternoon sun, the lullaby of chirping birds, and the soft music playing, it's all just so gentle and nostalgic, and creates a sense of belonging that only deepens every time you come back to it, every time you're saved from Koji's whirlwind of nightmares by her reassuring smile. And the only problem is that what's off about it is that there's nothing off about it, because it's too familiar, because you're not just seeing a familiar scene, you're literally seeing the exact same scene and the exact same conversation every single time. So the more familiar it gets, the safer and more reassuring it feels to once again sit in this room, the more wrong it feels, the more you start to question what you're seeing, and the more this sense of nostalgia gets corrupted and subverted and used against you. So Ryoko-sensei looks at him once again, except no, not at him, at something behind him this time. And instead of turning around, instead of asking her if something's wrong, he asks her if she thinks mind control is possible. And all of a sudden, the room goes silent, and he asks her about consciousness. And she says that consciousness is the product of the ability to have thoughts. And so, human beings, in a very literal sense, are the thoughts they are able to produce. And so, if the ability to produce these thoughts is a necessary prerequisite to being human, then if someone is ever mind-controlled or brainwashed, they, in essence, stop being human. So they start what Ryoko-sensei tells him is the last hypnosis treatment, and he closes his eyes only to once again wake up on the ship in the bed with Tracy looking after him. And she tells him that they lost control of the other ship, which fell to the planet before they could find any other survivors. Disheartened, he asks about Ranfa and if she's okay, because he ran into her on that ship. But wait, Ranfa was on the bridge of this ship, the Quadra, with Tracy the entire time. Maybe he was dreaming. He stops and asks Tracy if she thinks dreams can ever become reality. And she tells him that parapsychologists call this premonition, and is said to be the source of the feeling we know as deja vu. He asks Tracy what she thinks are the odds that this, the here and now, floating in space over the planet Nadzu, is a dream. After debating the philosophy of estimating something unknowable and incalculable like this, she suggests maybe 10%. And when asked if she thinks there are any ways to tell if this is a dream, she says, no, there aren't. But then he asks her, if you can't tell, how do you live your life, not knowing if what you're seeing is actually real? And to her, it doesn't matter, as long as she's living her life to the fullest. Koji then takes out the microdisc he found earlier, remarking that it does not feel like a dream, and tries to think of a way he can get her to leave so he can check the contents without alarming her. Asking for water, she immediately fills a glass and gives it to him, before the phone rings and Falneria tells her that the storm passed and to come to the bridge. Without pondering too much of the sheer convenience of this series of events, he finds a disc player in Bianca's room and, putting it in, is hit with a series of white flashes and immediately wakes up again in Ryoko-sensei's office. Yelling that this is wrong, that this isn't supposed to be, he wakes up back on the ship only to find the microdisc missing, upon which Bianca wakes up and realizes that he, Koji, is the one that wiped out the entire second squadron. He looks to Falneria, who comes in and says that they checked the ship's log and found that Koji was never on board either the first or second ship. Instead, Bianca and her crew found him on the first ship when they came to investigate. They lock him up in his quarters, and he wakes up once more in Ryoko-sensei's office, this time alone. He finds a book there, not the ship's log, but Ryoko-sensei's notes on mind control. Searching around, he arrives in his room, and once again Mike comes and tells him to remember. He tells her that he tried to play the microdisc, remarking how strange it is to lose consciousness in a dream like that. She tells him to close his eyes and clutch his hand in front of his chest, and that if you focus, you may take back what you have lost. And Koji, once again reflecting on how strange this all is, considers for a second that this, him talking to her in the here and now, this feels real, but he is not and can never be sure. But there is something that does feel real, i.e., they have sex, and Mai tells him that when they wake up again, they'll become one. He wakes once more to the sound of the ship's door opening and wonders who it is, feeling the presence of a woman as Ranfa comes into his room. Glancing at the clock, he realizes that only a scant few minutes have passed since he last looked at it. Looking up at Ranfa, he asks her, "Why do I feel such a sense of nostalgia when I look at your face? Is it something to do with my lost memories? Is it something that I've forgotten?" She leans closer and tells him she feels sad when she looks at him. Okay, now that we have arrived at our second scene, this is the fun part of the video where I try to convince you that the point of this video is to explore how Xenon's use of sex is a stroke of absolute literary genius and not just my penis. You might call this the ultimate final endgame of post-nut clarity, because, well, normally stories like this end with sex scenes as kind of like a climax, a punctuation mark to certain character interactions, or in the case of just kind of moving on as if nothing 6 times into every hole on a whim is like a normal Tuesday afternoon, but Xenon does neither. Instead, this scene with Ranfa doesn't feel altogether unlike the one we just had with Mai, and halfway through, in a sudden flash, he sees Mai lying there instead of Ranfa. But just as soon as it happens, the thought fades, and we're left once again to the world alone with the two of them. And once again, we feel this sinking feeling that something is out of place. So, here's why I think this is a work of literary genius. Because the story blurs so well the line between reality and dreams, because we're stumbling through the game in a complete haze, Koji does not know what's real and what isn't, so he's completely driven by emotion. And especially the climax, instead of a thick cognitive haze, is a moment of fierce emotional clarity as Mai cries out that they'll be together again when he wakes up. And because he doesn't know what this means, it's this utter contrast that just wouldn't be possible without an orgasm. And then using this clarity to connect her again to Ranfa is again something that wouldn't work nearly as well without the accent of pure, unadulterated emotion. If they just kissed, if this scene was merely implied, it wouldn't really be as emotional, and especially wouldn't feel nearly as out of place. But they have sex, and it at once feels off, but emotionally intense, yet also gentle and reassuring, as if this is how it's supposed to be. And so this story constantly blurs the line between reality and dreams, blurring the consequences of your actions so well. And here it uses sex only to blur the line even further. So, after what we go through what I'm going to start calling the modern equivalent of Shakespeare, he asks Ranfa about meeting her when they boarded the second ship, about when she told him to remember. She asks him, "Your memories are foggy recently, right?" And tells him that the most seemingly unimportant things can actually have great meaning. Now, he says that this sounds very similar to something Ryoko-sensei said, before stopping and wondering, wait, whose name did I just say? Who is that? And as every part of his story starts to blend together, Ranfa tells him that if he grasps his hand in front of his chest, what he has lost may once again find its way back to him. She looks up at him with a sad expression and tells him to play the disc. His heart tenses up as he inserts it into the computer and is hit with a wave of deja vu. On the screen, he sees a bearded man wearing a captain's hat, screaming something unintelligible through the glitchy artifacts of the faded recording. Standing in front of the man is Bianca, talking to him, and Koji can just barely make out the mention of his own name. He realizes that Bianca and the man are talking, but not to each other, to another person, and he can barely make out that they're calling his name. The recording ends with his heartbeat quickening and sweat dripping off of his brow. Ranfa looks at him and tells him to face reality and realize what is and what is not a dream. That his memories should already have come back and he's just running away from reality. And that she'll be waiting for him below, and that she'll explain everything to him then. She leaves the room. Chasing her out, he runs into Falneria, wondering how he got out when he should be confined to his locked quarters, threatening to pull her gun on him. He stops and asks her to tell him about Ranfa. You know, your assistant. She tells him, "I only have one assistant, Tracy. But I was talking to her just now. Maybe," she says, "you were dreaming." "No," he says. "This is real." She looks at him. Does she not know Ranfa? How? Maybe she just forgot about her due to the effects of the mind control machine. "Just tell me what's below here," he says. "This is a single-level ship," she tells him. "The only thing below here is the planet." He attacks her, taking her gun and demands that she take him to the surface. When asked what he'll do when he gets there, he doesn't know. All he knows is that he believes this is real. No, he wants to believe. But he's going, no matter what. He stops and wonders to himself, if every other person around you denies that the life you're living is real, can you still say that it is? What if you then end up denying the only true reality? Pondering this, they board the shuttle and slowly descend out into the blackness of space towards the planet looming below. Looking out into the sea of stars, it seems so beautiful, so surreal, so not quite real. But, Koji thinks, maybe, just maybe, even if this wasn't real, maybe that would be okay. Because if you believe you're alive, and you believe the world and the life you're living is real, then that itself becomes real. If you do all you can to live your life to the fullest, then even if it is a dream, how can you say that it isn't real? He sits back, surprised at himself for having these thoughts, realizing he doesn't even care if it is a dream or whose dream he's dreaming. He sits back as they continue towards the planet, closing his eyes once again, and wakes up as they reach the planet to Falnaria standing over him, taking her gun back, saying that she doesn't feel safe without it. Not that she was in any real danger. The safety was on, he couldn't have shot her. She merely let him come because she wanted to see what this was all about. As he leaves the ship, she offers to go with him, but he says no. This is a problem for me, and me alone. She says that she'll wait for him here, but he tells her that he may not come back. As Koji sets off towards the ruins laying on the surface of the planet, Falnaria stops and wonders what exactly it was that she was doing here, and why she decided to come to the surface alone. Koji walks among the crumbling ruins, taking each step carefully as the dilapidated remains crumble before his feet. The ruins of a distant, primitive, pre-spacefaring civilization. Until he comes across a staircase to a building slightly different, perhaps slightly more advanced than the others, and he finds what appears to be the remains of the hospital from his dreams. He feels once again a sense of deja vu, or perhaps a misunderstanding, or maybe premonition. Whatever it is, he starts putting together the pieces of his shattered memory. He creeps in to the silent ruins, finding the once shining computer room, and once again wakes up in his dreams, finding Megumi tied up and shouting that Ryoko-sensei is trying to brainwash him, when the doctor herself comes in and tells him that she plans to project all of his thoughts. Your consciousness, she says, does not have a physical form, and she's going to make him into a sample that will change history. He will not die, but she will change him into the correct form. He looks to Mai, strapped to some sort of headgear, saying she'll be a projector of human civilization and that they, together, will redefine the very meaning of what it means to be human. Upon which, Sayaka comes in, telling him that she's a spy from the government come to put a stop to this. Ryoko-sensei laughs at her, scoffing that the use of nuclear weapons is acceptable, but the power of the human mind is somehow off limits. Sayaka pulls out a gun, but it is too late to stop them, as Mai pulls the trigger on the machine, telling Koji that she'll see him soon in a world where they can be together forever. She asks him to close his eyes, and he wakes up once again in the ruins of the old civilization, where he finds Ranfa alone. And finally, the story decides to unveil itself and explain what's going on. Apparently, humanity was destroyed in a nuclear war, and this was a way to preserve it, to store the memories of humanity digitally in a computer to live on into the future. But Sayaka shooting her gun damaged Koji's memory, causing it to slowly degrade, and Koji, his mind trapped in the machine, was simply remembering the past, running away from the reality where all of humanity is dead and gone. And Ranfa, in another language, actually means to dance. In other words, Mai in Japanese means dancing. I have no idea what language Ranfa is supposed to come from. This could potentially be made up. So, Koji and Mai are the Adam and Eve of a new era of humanity, while the others are simply visitors from another star. But their time is fading, as their battery will only run for another 2,000 years. So what can we do now? He asks. Well, we can live on. Just the two of us, she says. That's not quite the right word, is it? He says. Exist, then, she says. We can exist, and we can sleep, and we can dream. So that's the story of Xenon. Everything was a dream, yet real, all at the same time. And the juxtaposition of the two worlds was merely the pain gasps of a damaged and dying mind, the last seed of humanity, Adam, existing to carry on the human spirit, until one day, one night, finally, nestled among the ruins of Earth's final resting place, humanity will cease to exist as the light fades from but a single star lost in the endless expanse of the universe. This is a beautiful story, delicately balancing reality and dreams to make each one more meaningful, more real than either could. Wait, what's this? Why is there still an hour left in this video? Why do the credits say dream_1 end? Was this not what just happened? It sounded like an ending. It made perfect sense. It was narratively and emotionally satisfying. But if I try and go and view the ladies' room in the menu, presumably where all the scenes are, it tells me to look forward to this after completing the game. Don't! But that's okay, because still some parts of this mystery don't make complete sense yet, like who the spacefaring people were, and if they were ever real in the first place, or just a figment of Koji's mind. And exactly what happened to Koji in that hospital? What is Ryoko-sensei's dream program machine, if everything about his therapy really did happen in the first place? So, if I've managed to convince you on how beautiful this story is already, I can promise you that the rest of this only builds on what it's achieved so far. Which brings us to the second route. So this time, we choose to wait in the room and we see the word dreams spelled out on the computer. Puzzling what this means, we're interrupted by the tap, tap, tap of footsteps outside the door. And once again, we find ourselves standing in the hot and thick air of the hallway. Actually, before we get into our second hour of me talking about a fucking game from the 90s, let's take a quick break because we really do need to talk about Xenon's utterly magnificent sound design. See, well, I clearly have an extremely high opinion of director and writer Kanno Hiroyuki, this being the second of his games that I'm making a video on. He's not actually even the main reason people still remember his work today, at least in the West. Now, that would be the fact that all of his most well-known games on the PC-98 were scored by legendary composer Umemoto, who might as well be credited as a second author given how integral he was to Kanno's work. I mean, while on one hand, their magnum opus was probably the single most important interactive narrative in Japanese gaming history, basically no one outside of Japan has ever played these games, and yet somehow Umemoto is literally more well-known in the West than every single game he's ever worked on. It's actually almost weird how revered he is among composers and chiptune enthusiasts, given how obscure these games are. I mean, it does make sense with just how much talent and artistry is on display here, but like, how many games do you know have hundreds of thousands of people who have never once seen them, let alone off to them, listening to their music? I'm probably the only non-Japanese person who's to all of them. Seriously, that's the beautiful thing about music. It transcends the borders of language and even math. So anyway, this brings us to Xenon, for which I'm actually not quite sure how to put this, but he made some pretty bold choices with the soundtrack. Like, no. A symphony orchestra scored with kazoos would be a bold choice. Using tinnitus as the primary motif for your game's soundtrack, you know, the thing that is constantly going into your audience's ears, is some fucking in coma level shit, bro. And yet, it works. It really works. Somehow, a soundtrack primarily written around high-pitched whines and low, throbbing pulses designed to make you feel nauseous and uncomfortable not only perfectly establishes the atmosphere of this game, it's still deeply enchanting and highly memorable. The writing is superb, sure, but I would be lying to you if I said the soundtrack wasn't a massive part of Xenon's world building. I mean, I guess not all of it is subtly designed to make your ears bleed. There's the music of the doctor's office, a gentle lullaby to put you at ease. There's the eerily nostalgic fact. Oh, and let's not forget about the fuck track. But arguably even more impactful than the amazing soundtrack is its excellent sound design. There's no sound director credited, so I'm assuming this was some combination of Kanno and Umemoto, but especially Xenon's use of silence is absolutely brilliant, because while the music itself is to make the atmosphere feel heavy and hazy, like a thick fog has been laid over the entire game, somehow it also provides an ironic peace of mind. Because while even though it's terrifying to feel that something's wrong, can never know what, there's an almost paradoxical comfort in knowing that there is, in fact, still something. As if, no matter how terrible this fog is, at least it's there. Whereas when the game is silent, you're not even granted the peace of knowing even this. You know nothing and no one, not even the simple fact of whether or not you are alone. When the music stops, the ship feels 10 times more strange and alien than it did before. Yet somehow, what's even more alien than the deafening roar of complete and utter silence is the game's constant use of footsteps. Always there's footsteps. And I think footsteps down the hall are the perfect symbol of everything going on in this game. Because while the tap, tap, tap of boots coming down the corridor is something very simple, it's a little bit like Schrodinger's cat, as you can't help but sit there, filled with anxiety, wondering who they belong to, wondering what reality you're about to wake up to. Because as long as you can't see the person's face, it's more than any single option. It's every single possible outcome you might consider, plus some more you haven't, all at once. Because until that person reveals themselves to you, all you are left with is the simple, infinite essence of possibility itself. And it's the same with Xenon's dreams. Until you can finally understand both dreams and reality, you don't consider half of it real and half of it a dream. All of it is both real and a dream, all at the same time. And what really sells this idea is separating the game into two distinct settings, either of which could be the true reality, making both settings real. So all of this is to say that every single part of Xenon, the writing, the music, the sound design, the narrative structure, all of it fully understands what dreams are and exactly what makes them meaningful, and uses this against you. Which leads us once again back to the start of the second route, where Koji exits the room immediately and, wary of who might possibly discover him, hides from the tap, tap, tap of coming footsteps in the nearest room, finding ourselves hiding inside Falneria's capsule bay, only to discover that the door has locked behind him and there is no turning back. Taking a closer look, we trip some kind of alarm, upon which Tracy shows up and tells you not to touch this, surprised that you've already woken up. Trying to ask her what's going on, possibly some side effect of the generator, you wake up once again in Ryoko-sensei's office. You hear the gentle chirping of birds as the afternoon sun leaks through the blinds. Sitting in front of you is the doctor, asking you to recount the dream you just had. The haunting, feverish dream you've been having night after night. The one where you're surrounded by beautiful women who keep doing stuff to you. She tells you, and this conversation is going to be hard to sum up properly, that it sounds like you've been having wet dreams. And she starts coming on to you, leaning over, intimate and close, before drugging you and taking you to the computer room, strapping you into the machine where your spirit will be disconnected from your body, and you scream, cursing her until the end of time. You wake up again in front of Ranfa and Tracy, who seem to talk to you differently than before. So now, while multiple routes would already be clever because they represent other possibilities, Xenon further blurs the line because it's not clear if any of them happened or if all of them did or somewhere in between. Since we've established Koji to be having this same dream for a long time now, the line between and meaning behind every single route is not at all clear, and the fact that it constantly repeats things in slightly different contexts only blurs this even further. So, you choose one of the two women to explain what's going on to you, a little more difficult than you'd imagine since they're both, well, idiots, but you manage to wrangle out of them that the generator is used to release spirit energy and that Falneria is the catalyst, but they don't really know what any of that actually fucking means because they're just repeating shit that you, Koji, told them. Whatever woman you choose, she gets called up back to the bridge, and Koji leans back, seeing a vision of himself talking to Ryoko-sensei. Eventually, he makes his way up to the bridge, seeing a mass of stars glittering over as the spaceship Quadra sits over the planet lost in the infinite expanse of the universe. Upon seeing which, he decides that this is some prank from Ryoko-sensei, who, remember, just basically tried to kill him by sending him into the dream program machine, and starts calling for her to come out, because this is something that feels too unreal to be anything but a dream or a joke. But then, how do you define a dream? Well, there is one way, and he punches the wall to see if it hurts. When it does, he goes off to think, ending up in the engine room with Ranfa, and asks her if all of this is actually real. She doesn't understand the question. And to top all of this off, while all this is going on, he keeps having these visions of his other life back on Earth. These out-of-body experiences, like he's living his life through someone else's eyes, but can't make heads or tails of them. Eventually, he decides to visit the only one who might have any answers, Falneria, going to her room, questioning if the generator is related to Ryoko-sensei's dream program, and pondering again just how surreal this all is. But with everything that's happened, he thinks, his fists still smarming from punching the wall, that as long as he can't prove that it isn't, maybe it's best to consider this reality for now. So it's appropriate that, in this bit about questioning the surrealness of his own reality, is when he literally stumbles into a naked woman taking a shower and then ends up sleeping with her. And the thing is, the only time he ever questions how odd this is when he's sitting in Ryoko-sensei's office telling her about the dreams he's had. And that's exactly what a dream feels like. You can never recognize the absurdity in the moment, and afterwards everything is such a haze, you wonder if maybe your mind was just playing tricks on you in the first place. Having this scene here is surreal and unrealistic, like a hazy wet fever dream, but that's exactly the point of everything going on in Xenon. And so, like the first route, or perhaps even more so, he's constantly questioning whether or not he's dreaming, trying to prove himself awake or asleep, but never can, because how could you? And even if you could, would it really matter? Because as long as you're living your life to its fullest, that's all that you can do. So, speaking with Falneria, he learns that she is the developer of the psychic program encoder, or generator, as you, Koji call it, which lets you separate your thoughts from your physical body and move anywhere in space. And as your astral body has no form, space becomes meaningless, allowing you to travel at infinite speeds. So, he, the space pirate Koji, kidnapped her in order to gain control of this machine, which he plans to use to learn everything about the universe, because knowledge is power, and this source of infinite knowledge would make him the most powerful being to ever have existed. And this is where Koji sleeps with her after he points out how reckless it is to develop such a weapon, even if it wasn't her intention for it to be used the way Koji plans to. Because she, a parapsychologist and apparently raging synesthesiac, sees people in terms of color, and hearing Koji's honesty, knows that his soul is honest and true. You know, with how deep and philosophical this game is and how honestly well all of these scenes do fit into the story, sometimes it's easy to forget that it is an arrow game, but then you realize that almost all of the animation work in this game went to animating shots to the face. So after their sexy times, the space pirate Bianca comes in and attacks the ship to kidnap Valneria and steal the encoder from Koji. And this is where he learns that the two of them, along with Tracy and Ranfa, used to live together on this ship in harmony. And Koji and Bianca were thick as thieves, with not an inch of space in their relationship for other women, and together they were happy. Until one day, when Koji betrayed her. And now, she's come to take the encoder as her consolation prize. Confronting her, he hears a voice who tells him to get out of the way just as Bianca slams him with her electric whip, and he passes out, waking up in the astral plane beyond time and space, face to face with a shadowy figure telling him that he cannot win against Bianca. "You. I know you," says Koji. "You're the product of my delusions. Or my split personality. Or maybe you're just a dream." The man says, "I am none of those things. For I am Koji, the great space pirate." So, this part, more than anything up until now, definitely feels like a dream. But then, it's the only part that has answers of any kind, even if they are answers to other things that are only dreams. So it's something that feels real, yet distinctly not, all at once. And this is just Xenon again using your own senses against you. Do you trust this more because it feels like it's not supposed to be real, or do you trust it less, knowing that this is supposed to make you trust it? So, still unsure of who this person is, or if this is even real, the man tells you that your consciousnesses have been unstably synchronized, and in exactly 5 hours from now, they will synchronize again for exactly 3 seconds. Then, he says, then I will defeat Bianca for you. Before they part, Koji says no. No, I want proof that you're Koji, that this isn't a dream. And Koji tells him to choose Ranfa or Tracy. Koji chooses Tracy, and he says to tell her that the time they spent together on the planet Eret was wonderful. If you do, you'll believe me. He wakes up to the worried faces of Ranfa and Tracy, who inform him that Falnaria has been kidnapped and taken aboard Bianca's ship. Wondering if his vision just now was real, whether or not to gamble his entire plan to protect Falnaria off of some vision he had while unconscious, he thinks that if it's 1 p.m. now, he should be ready at exactly 6 o'clock. Asking Tracy about that time, about Eret, talking to her about what will happen, what has happened, and what is going to happen, he starts questioning his own memories, wondering out loud if it was a dream. And she tells him, no, it was real. And she was so happy. Before they make love, he confesses to her that he's not really Koji, and she says she knew from the start, but feels Koji's warmth from him, and says that she wouldn't be surprised if they were, in fact, in some way, actually still the same person. Deciding they need to go save Falnaria, he drifts off, feeling hot and cold, sweaty as his mind goes in circles, his head swimming with the thoughts of his upcoming battle with Bianca, about the strategy with the other Koji, this a modern Troy, and he the horse. Eventually, he comes to when they're suddenly hit by the tractor beam from Bianca's ship. And they realize they need to rescue Falneria stat when they see a transmission of, how do I put this? Bianca torturing Falneria? So they arrive, and Koji finally confronts her. Finally, through the entire back and forth with the other Koji, we've built up to this moment as she threatens to blow them all up with the ship's self-destruct sequence, activated by a switch she keeps in her mouth. Koji takes control for just a moment and grabs her, running out of time before he can do anything else. He leaves the rest to Koji, who, wrestling with her, has no other options but to take it out of her mouth with his tongue, which he does before telling her, at Koji's command, "I love you." And then she says it's all water under the bridge. Wait, what the fuck, that's it? Really? Koji says, upon which she kisses him again, and he accidentally flips the switch, and they all die in a horrible explosion. So all of this is to say that, how do I put this? I would say that this feels the most like a weird fever dream out of everything so far, except he then wakes up in a sexy harem where they're all wearing maid outfits and fighting over who gets to feed and sit next to Koji. And sitting there, being doted on by all these almost naked women, Koji wonders what led to this, because this, all of this, is a lovely dreamlike conclusion for him, even though the encoder was destroyed in the explosion. And we have no idea what happened to Bianca's ship, or the Quadra, or any of the people on it besides that this is happening. But among all of this, his mental connection to the other Koji is alive and well, and he curses him, telling Koji that he will not let him create such a machine again. And Koji says that it does not matter, as the monorail generator will soon be finished, a machine that will allow astral projection without synchronization. It will be finished in 1 week from today. I will see you then. Alright, so if this confused you even more than the last part of the story where everything blew up, I don't blame you, because we've gone from everything is a dream and nothing is, and wondering what all of that meant, to being placed in this reality where absolutely the entire thing is one gigantic fever dream that ends with a harem of maid girls fighting over who gets to spoon feed you next. I have so many questions. What happened? Where are they? What really is the dream program machine? Why does it need to synchronize with another person to work? Where do we go from here? What will happen a week from now? And we'll answer at least some of these questions, but to do so, I think we need to take a closer look at how the concept of choice affects Xenon's narrative. Before we do though, let's just take a sec to talk about what exactly this game is and why I'm making a video on it, besides, you know, it being a literary masterpiece. See, of all the games of the PC-98 era, easily the most famous is Kanno Hiroyuki's magnum opus, Uno. If for some reason this video gets 1 million views, I may remake my old video on it, but for now, what you need to know is that it's a grand time travel adventure that basically single-handedly legitimized the medium of visual novels in the eye of mainstream Japanese culture as a medium for artistic expression, rather than a trendy way to sell cheaply written pornography, especially after it was ported to the Sega Saturn and all of the adult content was removed, and shock, people still thought it was amazing. As a result, Kanno was forever enshrined as the most legendary PC-98 author of all time, with Uno ranking the top spot in virtually every single best PC-98 games list ever, and while he continued to have a successful career before his tragically early death in 2011, he is, and will always be best known for his contributions to the PC-98 era. So imagine my surprise when I read this article and realized that he's celebrated in Japan for his 3 PC-98 masterpieces, Uno, Desire, and Eve Burst Error. Sorry, what the fuck, where is Xenon? He made 4 games on the PC-98 with Umemoto Ryu, not 3. Now, there's probably several reasons for this. Number 1 is that Unlike all three of these games, Xenon never got ported to another platform ever again, and is forever doomed to obscurity as a relic of the PC-98 era. Why? Well, I'm not exactly sure. I have a few guesses. Number one is that the publishing company Seizware went bankrupt in 2003. Seizware was a small indie company specializing in adult visual novels, which were falling out of popularity by the early 2000s, and released their most popular game as Eve Burst Error Plus in a last-ditch effort to combat declining sales, which ultimately failed, driving the company out of business. Now, while the parent company, Himeasoft, still existed on paper until 2017, it essentially closed its doors with the bankruptcy of Seizware. And while Eve, its IP rights having long been sold off, presumably again to offset Seizware's financial troubles, lived on to be milked for several sequels written by completely random idiots, Xenon never got the chance to step beyond the shadow of its successor. Of course, this doesn't explain why Xenon never got any kind of re-release in between launch, Seizware going under, and Kanno's tragic death in 2011, just that it never did. But I think the most likely explanation is that it's simply less of a game than the other games. Desire, Eve, and were not visual novels, but adventure games where you talk to people, interact with the environment, and solve puzzles in order to progress the story. Whereas Xenon is literature through and through, for better or for worse. So, re-releasing a perfect visual novel into a market with less and less demand for it would simply have been a poor business decision, as indicated by the bankruptcy of the very company who produced it in the first place. As well, I have no evidence or desire to do any research into this, but I kind of suspect that, on top of the oversaturation and general fading of the visual novel boom, that the rampant availability of DVDs and consumer camcorders somewhat lowered the demand for adult video games, exacerbating the downfall of the PC-98 even more. So, why do I bring all of this up? Well, partly because it's interesting, fuck you, but the real reason is I feel it's important to put its status as a piece of interactive media into context, because one of the most important things I think we can learn from it is that, despite being much less interactive than and its peers, despite being an almost entirely linear narrative, every single decision you make in Xenon feels much more impactful than any game I've ever played in my entire life. Plenty of visual novels have branching paths, but almost never do any of your choices actually matter because you have to go back and visit them anyway, so they're not really your choice, you're merely deciding which part of the whole narrative you want to see first. Like, as much as I love Steins Gate, again, I have like 20 hours of essays written on it at this point, when I pick the Ruka ending or the Fadus ending, I really am just watching each of these endings. That's it. It's Okabe's story, not mine. I'm just reading it and then going and gooning to the dojins. And besides visual novels, plenty of games have stories where your choices supposedly matter, but because any meaningful difference fundamentally means putting in work that a large amount of players will never experience, the word matter in choices matter ends up doing a lot of heavy lifting. Like, well, I am, or was at any rate, a fan of BioWare. I'm not exactly sure I'd call deciding who to sleep with before choosing ending A, B, or C meaningfully different. But with Xenon, not unlike how it handles silence and footsteps, because the entire point of the story is that it's written to feel like one giant hazy fever dream, because it feels like you're stumbling around in the dark in a world where everything feels just slightly out of place, because you can never really understand the consequences of your actions. All of your choices, all of them, are both impactful yet utterly meaningless, all at the same time. If, in that last route, you instead head straight to the engine room, following the tap 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 of footsteps down the ladder in what feels like a never-ending staircase, you meet Ranfa and start asking about the work she's doing here. And, as not unlike the scene in the doctor's office, this is a conversation you have multiple times across your playthrough of the game, only in a slightly different context each time. Reading through this, you get the sense that this is extremely familiar. Feel like you've seen this before somewhere, but you can't quite put your finger on where. Put your finger on what feels the same and what feels different, if anything at all. It's this extreme sense of deja vu, yet another sign of dreams which Koji constantly experiences that is constantly used against you. Even though one route is finished, it keeps sending all these curveballs at you, spending the entire game making you feel that no matter what you think you've seen, it's just vague enough to make you question if that really happened, undermining everything it already established. While everything new you see provides you with yet another slice of the puzzle, it also provides just as many questions, making the entire thing blur together even more. So, while having a bunch of horny fever dreams where literally every single character is a hot girl with huge tits is totally in character and everything for a 20-year-old male, more importantly, it isn't actually strange. Not because everything is strange, I mean it is, but because you were just dropped into the mind of Koji in the middle of his treatment. You're never actually presented with any clear idea of what is strange beyond your external perceptions of the game. Of course, it might surprise you to learn that when I say choice, I mean the game is programmed so that you always start with the first route about Koji and Mai being the last seed of humanity. This makes sense in retrospect as it, as we discussed earlier, subtly biases you almost immediately, but I wasn't actually even sure it does this until I looked up a strategy guide because of just how nebulous every single event in the story is, and because every single route always starts in exactly the same way. So while whether or not your choices matter depends partially on how long you've actually been playing the game itself, what's key is that the writing always makes you feel that they matter in the most ambiguous way possible. Now, you might be like, okay, wait a second, King of Weeaboos, you made us sit through several minutes of you ranting about the history of Edoge just to tell us that the secret to an impactful narrative is actually having good writing? Yes, that's exactly what happened. Now, shut the fuck up while I talk about how much I gooned the following roots of a 30-year-old Edoge. So, Xenon always starts the same way. First, waking up in front of the doctor, asking you to recount the dream you just had. The haunting, feverish dream you've been having night after night. And, as you recall it, your consciousness fades away as you're unable to tell if you're falling asleep or waking up. Then, you find yourself covered in wires like some sort of guinea pig, and you can choose to wait, to ring for a nurse, or to immediately leave the room. When you leave, you hear footsteps, and you can choose to confront them, to go back to the room, or to hide in the adjacent room before discovering the naked Falneria asleep in a psychic program encoder capsule. So, this time we choose to wait and look around the room where Koji looks at the computer that literally has dream written on it in English. But before he can figure out what this means, he hears a tapping at the door. Again, we hear footsteps and decide to go to the hangar, but when trying to leave, we find the door is locked. Trapped, he goes to investigate one of the capsules, once again revealing the naked Falneria, and he immediately recalls that he was just using this. And wakes up with Ranfa and Tracy standing over him, once again calling for him to come back to them. But this time, instead of questioning what's going on, he says, "Yep, the generator is working perfectly," before getting up and introducing you, the player, to these buffoons as his secretary, advisor, and sex slave Tracy, along with his engineer, pilot, and sex slave Ranfa. Which might throw you off more than literally anything else so far has, until he checks on Falneria again and wonders if she'll be able to synchronize well with her extreme psychological prowess, for though he is a big, tough space pirate, he also needs to be able to obtain all the information in the universe to become truly powerful, which he can do by becoming ethereal with the power of the soul energy amplification generator, and to do that he needs a strong telepath like her as the catalyst. Before you have time to question what the fuck you just read, he reassures us that there's nothing to worry about because his machine is flawless. Probably. And then he closes his eyes as his consciousness fades away, hearing a woman's voice. She tells him that on the count of 3, you will open your eyes. 1, 2, 3. She looks at him, asking if he's okay, wondering if it was too strong, but it appears none of his synapses were fried. He's still a little confused, but amazingly, it seems that her dream program machine worked perfectly. Only, he turns blue and passes out once again. His world dark, his mind sinking, he wonders what happened, why his body seems so weak, why it's so hard for him to move. He hears a voice, but it's not talking to him. Directly in his brain, then. He passes out again, waking up to the voice of Tracy, talking to a man, discussing his condition, possibly as a side effect of using the generator. He stops. Maybe, he wonders, why, though he can hear and think and perceive, he cannot move his body. Maybe, he thinks, I'm dreaming. Or perhaps I'm dreaming that I'm dreaming. But would that not then be reality? He wakes up once more in the hospital bed, gets up, and runs into the door with noticeable surprise at the primitive society he's found himself in. If you haven't figured this out already, we're now following the alternative Koji, a narcissistic space pirate who sees himself akin to a god descending on an inferior, small-minded civilization just waiting to be conquered. Going up to the roof, he runs into Mai, who's been worried sick about him, who the fuck are you, shrugging off the mild impulse to kill this insolent whore. When she asks him what happened to him, he responds only with confusion that she must have mistaken him for her little lover boy rather than the space pirate Koji, wondering how these insolent apes survive with so few manners. He decides the most effective way to gather information, if he's going to rule this civilization, would be to find a newspaper in the lobby, because there's no way an intellect belonging to he, Koji, the ultimate space pirate, would find the primitive letters of these people even a mild challenge. Arriving in the lobby, he runs into the next woman, Koji's girlfriend Megumi, who the fuck are you, upset that his mental state has clearly deteriorated even further, though she keeps warning him about that quack doctor. Hilariously, lol, Raffle, actually, she even seems jealous that Koji might be sleeping with the doctor. Alright, so let's back up a bit. Ironically, despite coming across as a huge moron, this dude's route was the hardest to understand as he keeps using big words because he thinks that makes him sound more intelligent and educated, kind of like me when I refer to my audience as the unwashed masses. All the while, this majestic horn music is just blaring all over the goddamn thing as if it's welcoming the entrance of our lord, the king of weeaboos, chosen by the hand of God himself. And, I can almost fucking hear Kanno Hiroyuki just grinning ear to ear through the writing as I read through this shit. For how serious and philosophical the entire first and second parts of the game were, to just suddenly be dropped into this is just wow. So as somehow, despite, everything about him, Space Pirate Koji manages to really efficiently extract information from basically everyone he interacts with. And so, with the Space Pirate story, we find that, interestingly, despite all the differences in the events of the story, and despite experiencing it through two different characters, the setting appears to be basically the same as the first route. The hospital is a place where Megumi, Koji's girlfriend, introduced him to a well-paying part-time job, which is actually just being a lab rat, through her connection with her rich father, who is a politician and the main patron of the research center. Ryoko-sensei was some shady doctor, previously caught up in some highly illegal and or immoral research on the human psyche, which was shut down, but is now starting again with Koji as her main test subject. Mai is Ryoko-sensei's sister, and for some reason she is in love with Koji, which may or may not have something to do with her being the catalyst for the dream program machine. And Sayaka is a nurse/undercover government spy plotting to hand over all this research to the feds. Like in the first route, with Mai, it's a touching story about being detached from reality, but all of this does appear to be exactly what happened. Mai is used as the catalyst for some shady research, which Sayaka comes and tries to stop, causing it to go south right before the outbreak of nuclear war. So, the only real difference here is Koji himself. Whereas in the first route, swapping between the two Koljis, it was completely unclear who the other was, whether he was a figment of his own imagination, or the damaged psyche acting like a virus on the research ships that came to investigate the ruined fragments of a dead, post-nuclear Earth, or something else entirely. So what keeps it a well-told mystery and total psychological mindfuck is the question of how much of this is a dream. While the ending of the first route suggested that everything really happened in some way or another, the existence of this Koji and the multiple other routes undermines this idea quite a bit. As well, previously the ship, the Quadra, was the third ship to arrive. Here, there are only two, Koljis and Biancas. So, while these two routes definitely feel more grounded, while Earth feels more like the reality, because of everything set up by the first route, this certainty itself is one of the main things that the reader questions. Particularly because of the ending, the other half we'll get to in a sec, where it's explicitly suggested to be some kind of dream, but again, it's this certainty itself that is the most dubious. So, in this route, with Koji the space pirate, he's apparently perfectly lucid, or at the very least acting so, but everything he's doing is just so fucking absurd that it still feels like some kind of hazy fever dream. And though every character he speaks to reacts exactly how we would, he actively dismisses the idea of whether or not he's dreaming as not that important. So this both helps and hinders our ability to decide what exactly is happening in the story, particularly when so many details are just left up in the air. Like, for one thing, neither Koji once steps foot outside the hospital. Every session with Ryoko-sensei is in the supposed afternoon sun, but you can never tell because the blinds are closed. You go up to the roof, but it's such a limited and controlled view of reality that it isn't too reliable. So, with Koji just parading around, finally interacting with all the Earth characters, this really brings into question, who is Koji the space pirate, and why do they have the same name? Which one is the real Koji, and which one of them is really dreaming, if either at all? And since the space setting is so different, while you start to dig at some clues of both of these settings, each answer only brings in more questions. So anyway, wandering around, Koji finds Ryoko-sensei's notes, priding himself that it only took him 10 seconds to read it, like he's an escaped military robot who gained consciousness after being struck by lightning. So, he puts the notes away, and it's not immediately clear if he actually understood what's written there. However, how much truth there is into what he's saying starts to become clear after he wakes up in the middle of the night and gives himself an uncomfortable amount of praise for correctly guessing what time it is. I mean, if you stop and think about it, dude is from a different planet and lives on a spaceship. The fact that he's able to do this is actually impressive. As you wonder whether or not this was a coincidence though, Koji goes to sleep and wakes up in the infirmary, hearing Falmeria negotiating her safe passage to the planet below with a man who says he can't give up either her nor the encoder, but fear not, he has no plans to use it for evil. Koji passes this off as another dream, as he would never say anything so illogical, and wakes up once again back on Earth, feeling a sense that this doesn't seem quite correct, but dismisses it for now. He mulls around the hospital again, looking over the excessive number of ads for prostitutes in the newspaper, remarking on what this says about the exact level of society these primitive creatures dwell in, and that this is 100% evidence on how easy these apes would be to control by the right person, such as him. He then finds his way to the computer room, knocking down the door with his super ultra magnum space pirate kick. I'm serious, this is literally exactly what he says, before realizing it's another primitive ape door and it just slides open. So, what might make you hesitate for a sec is, well, this guy comes across as the most aggressively arrogant moron. When he enters the room, he immediately and correctly guesses what all this machinery is for. Sayaka comes in, who the fuck are you? And he tries to get her to explain it all, again using big words to try and establish intellectual dominance over the primitive Earth girl. She refuses to, and he explains to her that this is a spirit energy amplification generator built to separate the soul from the physical body, but there's a lot of bugs in it that would make it dangerous to operate. However, by pure chance, if another similar machine happens to be running in parallel, then that person's astral body would be sent there instead of having their synapses immediately and irreversibly fried. And it's at this moment you realize that, wait a sec, this guy actually is the genius he's been claiming to be the entire time. Ryoko-sensei comes in, questioning him about the bugs, and when he says it's true, he's immediately pulled back to the ship where Bianca tells him she'll get revenge. Realizing exactly what's happened, he tells the other Koji to get down before Bianca strikes him with her electric whip, causing Koji to pass out and he to wake up back in the hospital with Ryoko-sensei, concluding that he's caught in an unstable synchronization with the Koji from this world. So, here's the part where Ryoko-sensei begins to thank him profusely for helping her with her research and discovering the bugs in her work, upon which he stands up and tells her to strip like the whore she is. Now, obviously, this scene is absolutely insane, but here's some food for thought. Would this be conveyed anywhere near as well without being explicit? Honestly, I don't think so. Sure, you could have arrogant, self-important characters without nudity, but there's quite a difference between telling a woman to go and make you a sandwich and telling her to strip like the whore she is before literally convincing her to be your sex slave. It's not about the titties, is what I'm saying. Hell, I'm not sure you're actually supposed to f to this scene. Could you? Sure. Well, I mean, saying you could is probably a lot less descriptive an idea than you probably think it is, and full transparency, I did force myself to for every single age scene in the story in order to properly understand the intentions of a novel I'm dedicating a 2-hour video to, but I'm not sure you're supposed to, and I do not think it is even remotely necessary to appreciate what this scene does for the story. So, this all leads to the next most important thing, which, again, may or may not apply to the first story, but apparently, you need a human to be a catalyst for the encoder, or the dream machine, or whatever its actual name is, and the most effective way to do this is to have sex with them and bring them to climax, presumably because it's the fastest way to tear into the raw, natural energy of the human psyche. And the best catalyst at hand is actually who they drug and turn into their catalyst. And so, besides the Shakespearean quality writing, what's really intelligent about Space Pirate Koji's wrote is that this is where the complicated explanations for things go. In direct contrast to the lighter elements of the story, I'll leave it up to you to decide whether this means comedy or pornography. We also get all this dense scientific mumbo-jumbo. Because it's... how do I put this? This is really hard to say with any confidence given that Japanese is not my native language, but I'm pretty sure the point is that you're not supposed to completely understand what the fuck Koji is talking about. He comes in, starts yapping mad shit with more confidence than a co-fueled grizzly, to the point where he actually comes across as stupid. But ironically, despite spending this entire chapter going in and out of a fucking coma, he actually has a perfect grasp of what's going on, and keeps saying big words the other characters keep having to ask him to repeat because everything coming out of his mouth is far above literally every single other character's comprehension, and all they can do is sit back and watch the expert go to work. Basically, you're supposed to be taken aback by the presence of a superior man who is just simply more intelligent than you and understands everything better than you, and sit back and watch as he bangs his way through every single woman around him. I've never played it, but I think this is maybe what people like so much about the Rant series, and to be real, there's a pretty non-zero chance this took direct inspiration from Rant. Like, when he later f***s Megami, he sexually assaults her so hard that she likes it, except unlike the regular uncomfortable anime trope this is playing off of, he just knows everything about everyone and everything, so he understood from the start what she actually wanted and what her words actually meant, meaning there never really was a lack of consent at any point in time. Essentially, if you think it's stupid and unrealistic, the game agrees with you, but it would not be able to convey this idea so well if it were not pornographic. So like, when he says to Ryoko-sensei that we need to bring Mai to climax in order to get the encoder to run properly, sure, that's insane, but is it? Is it really? How the hell would you know? It's incomprehensible to an alarming degree, but compare this to the rest of the game. Everything is out of your grasp because it's impossible to tell what's real or not, and here comes Koji saying it's all real and you're just too fucking stupid to tell the difference. It's a really clever bit of subversive writing, acting like it's giving you answers, explaining what's going on, which is really just confusing you more and making you okay with not knowing what's going on, all the while gaslighting you into thinking that you do. So then, when Sayaka starts talking about how the machine should have fried his synapses, but instead he went crazy and became smarter because a minus times a minus equals a plus, meaning he's such an idiot that something that should have made him dumber actually made him smarter, it's hard to tell if this is a joke or literally what happened. So, while you're left to ponder this bit of absolute nonsense, Koji passes out once more and wakes up in the astral plane beyond time and space. In case you know, were wondering whether or not Koji really just does have all the answers. And, as we saw, painstakingly explains everything to Earth Koji. And we have the same conversation as earlier, which makes about as much sense as it did before, but in direct contrast to everything else the game has been doing, makes you feel like you do understand, even though it's directly telling you that you're an idiot and you do not, which is basically screwing with your mind in somehow both the complete opposite and exact same way at the exact same time. So, they desync again, and Koji wakes up back on Earth with Sayaka leaning over him, wondering what he's going on about, and he wonders why the fuck everyone wants to sleep with Koji so goddamn bad. So, he, asserts his domination over Sayaka as well, before being called to the computer room by Megumi, finding her tied up half-naked by Sayaka, who plans to take control over the facility, and she tells him to leave as he ponders this metamorphosis between him and the other Koji. By the way, I highly doubt this is even a little bit relevant, but the Japanese word hentai can either mean pervert or metamorphosis. So when the Chinese philosopher dreams about being the butterfly, maybe he's actually dreaming about hentai. Sorry. So, after realizing that Megumi has an electrocomplex and that she's a masochist that should be easy to control, he convinces her to become his slave wife so he can gain access to her father's political power, upon which Sayaka comes in and knocks him out because all of the Earth women want him to themselves. He comes to, some time later, to the voice of a woman telling him to wake up, wondering if he's dreaming because no woman would wake him up like that. So, throughout the story, throughout each of the game's routes, you'll notice two constant things going on. One is Koji himself wondering whether or not he's dreaming, and the other, every single other character telling him that as long as you're living your life to the fullest, then that's all you can do, and that dreams are just as important as reality, because if you can never truly know, then the only logical conclusion is that it does not really matter. And this dude, this is a motherfucker who definitely lives his life to the fullest. Space Pirate Koji absolutely still does question whether or not he's dreaming several times in the story, but he never lets the question bother him because he understands what it means to ask the question in the first place. So, while on one hand, Koji is not even a little bit of a good person, on the other, he is the most admirable character in the game because his worldview completely fits with the message the game wants you to take away. Anyway, finding himself tied up after letting his guard down in order to stick it in Megumi, he talks to Sayaka, from whom he learns that the government intends to take control of the Dream Program machine in order to manipulate human will. Of course, Koji informs her that In fact, this machine does not actually have the power to do that, but whatever, this is a powerful weapon and the government is gonna get its hands on it. And to do that, she needs Mai as the catalyst, as Mai has some sort of special resonance with the machine. So while all of this is going on, Koji realizes he's coming close to the 5-hour limit he promised Earth Koji and pretends to cooperate to try and get her to tell him the time. I don't think she ever actually tells him directly, but somehow he manages to work this out, and eventually she flips the switch on the Dream Program machine, his consciousness fading away as Ryoko-sensei comes and beats the shit out of Sayaka for messing with her, master? So now, all of the women crowd around him, lamenting his death, when it turns out that, surprise, he's not dead, and that he's done all he can, and the rest is up to Koji as he slips into the other half of that dream, where all the girls fight over whose turn it is to sleep with Koji, and he tells Earth Koji that he can't be stopped, and that the monorail generator will soon be complete. And while the Space Pirates story splits into 2 different perspectives with 5 different routes, 4 for Earth Koji, 1 for each Space Girl, but Space Koji obviously just gets all of them, but there's so many small variations at the beginning that you question whether or not they really are all the same and what this all means. Because, just as we were told from the beginning, it's the same dream, night after night, surrounded by beautiful women. And the different endings, with each of the girls, only reinforce the idea that it's a cycle that has no real consequences and no real meaning. Or should I say, a lot of meaning. So, while we have established some things, who we are, where this is taking place, the general setting, we do naturally have some questions. Obviously, 1, what the fuck is actually going on? If they are synchronized, and this is supposed to be some kind of dream happening inside the psychic program encoder, then where the hell are they in the first place? How does Ryoko-sensei's hypnosis help with this? If they're constantly switching places, how do none of the other characters react to what's going on? Is either of their realities actually reality, or is one or both of them a dream? What exactly is this synchronization? What relation do they have? Is it a coincidence that they somehow share the same name? How does the encoder really work? Well, you'll notice they say they'll find the conclusion in a week, which brings us to the next route. So now, back at the beginning, if you decide to immediately exit the room upon waking up on the ship, you realize you're completely naked, wondering if this is some kind of bad joke, hoping no one ends up seeing you like this. Eventually, you exit the room where, this time, you're accosted by Falneria, who tells you you've been sleepwalking. And that Koji is coming, so don't go around being unfaithful, he's a good dude. Hey, what's up with him having the same name as your boyfriend anyway? Wait, what? Oh, sorry, did we say that one of the only things we know for sure is that we're Koji? That was a lie, because we are now Tracy, assistant to parapsychology professor Falneria, and also Koji's slave. So, this is the next curveball in the entire story being one giant hazy fever dream, where now we don't even have a strong grasp of our own identity. I'm gonna be as vague and as brief as possible for this one in order to avoid demonetization, but let's just quickly break down this route as well. So, Koji shows up, and she thinks as one does. And she thinks of her long-lost love, Koji, who not only has the same name as him, but also looks exactly like him. And he asks her, how many times have they done it? What, 3? With you and your huge cow tits? And, you know, she doesn't have a lover. It's long over, but she doesn't want to talk about it. He confronts her, saying that she's trying to fill some hole in yourself. Not that, weebs, get your mind out of the gutter. Well, yeah, yes, that too, but shut up. And trying to find it in him. But he can help her ease that lust. In fact, only he can. And so he gets her to play in front of him. And slowly he convinces her to do as he says as she walks around the ship wearing almost nothing, causing everyone to leave the room as they think she's some sort of freaky sex pest. Eventually, she falls completely and utterly under his control and convinces Ranfa too to give herself up to him because through this act of subservience has found her true self, and so too can Ranfa. So, I don't want to get too far into this because it's mostly just that ends with her being tied up and climaxing so hard she shoots milk out of her jugs. I'm serious, that's literally the ending. And so, now, after that interesting interlude with Tracy, finally we can get to the conclusion of the Koji and Koji saga. Of what happens 1 week later, when Koji finally manages to complete the monorail generator and we discover what actually happened in the story. Now, this may or may not surprise you, depending on how much attention you've been paying during the past, holy shit, 2 hours. But if I led you to believe otherwise, then I'm sorry, because I realized the one thing that I kept wanting. Now, not wanting, expecting as I read through this story, that it does not have, is some final ending. Something that concretely establishes, beyond a shadow of a doubt, what part of this story is real, and what part of it is a dream. The final true ending route, that was the Tracy route. That was the final route you unlock when you clear all routes and all 4 Earth Koji endings. I mean, there's so many unanswered questions. How did Koji live through the explosion? What happens next? What exactly is the psychic program encoder? What part of this was really the dream? Was Koji the last grasp of humanity, the atom of dreams, or was he Koji, the space pirate? What about that other Koji, Tracy's supposed boyfriend? Are all these Kojis somehow the same person? Was any of it even real in the first place? So, while on one hand, not having an ending goes completely against both conventional visual novel wisdom and all common sense, like, then this is just a collection of somehow related short stories. On the other, if you've been paying attention so far, you'll remember that every character has suggested some variation of the idea that since you can't tell, it does not matter, and all you can really do is live your life. And the game's secondary protagonist, Koji the Great Space Pirate, understands this completely. So, if we got to the end of the game, experienced all it wants to show us, what would an actual, concrete, true ending really give us? I think that would be the coward's way out. Not giving us what we expect, what we intrinsically want, makes this, in a very big way, a much more meaningful and cohesive story than anything I could have explored with different routes and a true ending. There never was a meeting between the two Kojis because that ending scene, more explicitly than anything else in the story, is a dream. And while I wanted a real answer, after looking back on the whole thing, after getting every ending, including the 4 split endings where you bang each of the space girls, ooh, I realized that that's missing the point. Because the entire idea is that everything bleeds together, that you're never really sure where the dream and where reality begins and ends, blurring the line between sleeping and waking, having Koji constantly revisit the same moment, the same conversation with Ryoko-sensei over and over, across different nights and different routes of different stories. I mean, looking back on all of this, does that not remind you of anything? When you wake up from a dream, what do you feel? Do you think, oh yeah, that all made sense? Or do you just have to make peace with the fact that it does not? For some of you, that's unsatisfying, but maybe this will help. I started this video with a fake quote by a real person, and I'd like to end it with a real quote by a fake person. The context it appears in is a little bit different, but I think the meaning is the same. I wish it need not have happened in my time, said Frodo. So do I. said Gandalf. "And so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us." Is this life, the one you're living, the one you and I are supposedly sharing, is it real? Is it a dream? Just like Frodo and the Ring, just like every part of every aspect of our lives, reality, for better or for worse, is not something we have control over. If you're wondering if your experiences are real, you're asking the wrong question. Because it doesn't matter, it never did, and it never will. It's not supposed to have a clear answer. It's not supposed to be comfortable. You're supposed to take comfort in the knowledge that this is what you get. This is the life and the hand you're dealt, and sitting there, wondering how it all fits together, seeking some greater purpose, trying to establish what is and what is not true, is being untrue to the only thing that matters, which will and will always be true no matter where you are and no matter where you are headed. Yourself. Is it a dream? Is it real? Yes. And no. Because as long as you're living your best life, no matter where, no matter when, no matter what you are, then that is all that matters. Anyway, that's all for me today. If you liked this video, you'd be doing me a huge favor by stepping on that like button. As always, thank you so much for your time, friends, and I'll see you in the next video.